accommodations, and a uniquely immersive itinerary for two. Experienced guides reveal sites of antiquity and showcase archaeological sites at Caesarea along the Mediterranean Sea, the Qumran caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and the fabled Sea of Galilee. Don't miss your chance to win this adventure. Enter on our website at WTTW.com/sweepstakes or call 773-509-1111 extension 2 today.
This summer, get away from it all with the new comedy drama series Us on Masterpiece.
Let's make it a rule. Live in the moment.
The 10th annual PBS Short Film Festival.
We should not let go of our roots and we should not give up.
Icon, music through the lens.
Cover of Rolling Stone meant you were something.
An expedition with Steve Backshall Unpacked.
It is a once-in-a-lifetime thing.
That is awe-inspiring.
All this and more.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center. The Martin and Mary L. Boyer Foundation generously supports programming on WTTW in loving memory of Alan I. Boyer.
On Icon.
It's visual, it's audio, it's art.
With Abbey Road, Sgt. Pepper, Definitely Maybe, Morning Glory, you've got these visual connections.
That 12-inch square was a lovely art piece.
It's more than just a photograph, it's a work of art.
Friday at 9 on WTTW.
Hola, mi nombre es Yael y estás viendo WTTW.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the generosity of the Lloyd A. Fry Foundation.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. On the show tonight.
The news around the country on COVID-19 is not good.
The latest updates on rising COVID numbers, a possible vaccine booster shot, and a new mask guidance from the CDC.
This is a historic moment, and this is a democracy-defending moment.
Our Spotlight Politics team on the political fallout of the January 6th committee on Illinois congressmen.
We're also advancing equality in how we issue marriage licenses.
Two new state laws help ease the marriage certification process for the LGBTQ plus community. Your home might be eligible for lead service line replacement. We share the details.
I'm Angel Ito, and coming up tonight, we'll have a closer look at 26 of the original works by artist Frida Kahlo.
And artist Chris Ware is our tour guide for a new exhibition that makes the case that the comic strip was born and raised right here in Chicago. But first, some of today's top stories. The U.S. Senate moves a step closer toward a deal on the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure proposal. The Senate voted to advance the legislation after Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said he would be a yes vote on allowing debate to proceed. McConnell had been considered a major obstacle to the legislation. The bill is said to include spending on highways, roads, bridges, mass transit, and improvements in broadband internet connections in rural areas, plus lead service line replacement in places like Chicago. We'll have more on that later in the program. The Chicago Board of Education approves its $9.3 billion budget for Chicago Public Schools for the upcoming school year. This budget includes $672 million for facility investments throughout the city and more than $1 billion in federal funding for student supports. And this means ensuring a safe return to in-person instruction and addressing the, quote, disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. Meanwhile, members of the Chicago Teachers Union criticized the plan, calling for some of that federal funding to go toward more school nurses, counselors, and staff. Illinois is set to begin awarding 185 coveted permits to offer recreational cannabis dispensary, this after about a year of delays and frustration. Tomorrow is the first of these three lotteries, with 55 licenses being chosen among hundreds of applicants. Illinois was supposed to have awarded its first social equity dispensary licenses about a year ago, but instead lawsuits and criticisms of a flawed application scoring process put it on hold. The next two lotteries are scheduled for next month. Consider wearing a mask indoors, even if you're fully vaccinated. That's the newest recommendation from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which now says all individuals should mask up indoors in areas where there is substantial or high transmission of COVID-19. This comes as cases spike across the country and here in Chicago, where Lollapalooza is set to begin tomorrow. And joining us for an update on all things COVID is Dr. Robert Murphy, Director of the Institute for Global Health at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. Dr. Murphy, welcome back to Chicago tonight.
Hey, thank you.
We didn't think we'd be having this conversation at this point in time, but here we are. COVID cases spiking in Chicago. As we mentioned, the city's averaging 185 daily cases. That's a 62% increase from just a week ago. What is driving this surge?
What's driving this surge are the unvaccinated people who were supposed to voluntarily use masks and social distancing when they were out in mixed groups in the public. And that did not happen. They just acted like all the vaccinated people. And what that's done is it's basically restarted the pandemic, another big wave of infections. And that's really unfortunate. The voluntary system obviously failed.
Does that mean, and as we hear President Biden today talk about mask mandates or vaccination or testing mandates for federal workers, does that mean there have to be mask mandates in Chicago and Illinois again?
But it's all happening right now as we speak. The voluntary system didn't work. So we tried it, it didn't work. So what will happen now is there's going to be mandates. Mixed groups will have to wear masks indoors at least, maybe even sometimes outdoors. It really remains to be seen. It remains to be seen how bad it is. But this is, it's just this tragedy. Now, the same thing happened in India with the Delta variant. Delta is just so much more contagious compared to the other variants that have hit the United States. And, just exposure to somebody less than 1 minute puts you at risk. So that's just the big game changer here.
And the data says that the vast majority of those coming down with new infections driven by the Delta variant are unvaccinated, although we do hear reports of breakthrough cases. So how susceptible are vaccinated individuals to this Delta variant? And then how susceptible are they to spread the disease?
Well, those are good questions. So originally in the breakthrough cases, they were super mild infections with very little virus. And you heard experts around the country just say that, the vaccinated breakthrough cases are not causing really any part of this pandemic. That thinking has changed now because the thing is so highly contagious, and the amount of virus in the breakthrough cases turns out to be higher than we originally had with the other variants of concern. So this is just tragedy. Now, the good thing is for vaccinated people, we have to keep this in mind to really push these vaccines now, is they're not getting that sick. They're not ending up in the hospital. They're not ending up in the ICU, and they're not dying from COVID. Whereas the unvaccinated ones are behaving just like COVID was before, 10 to 15% in the hospital, 1 to 2% are dying. That's really what the metric is now.
But still a risk that vaccinated individuals, should they come down with COVID, could spread it. Now, all of this, as we mentioned, happens as Lollapalooza kicks off tomorrow. I think it's been debated ad nauseum. It's going to go on. What kind of bump do you expect to see in Chicago with COVID cases as a result of this event?
Those people at Lollapalooza are from all over the United States and the world. This is going to be, a spreader event. They are requiring that people that attend Lollapalooza have a proof of vaccine. However, I don't know how thoroughly they're checking. And this was done in Europe recently at a big concert there, and over 1,000 cases were reported after a big event similar to Lollapalooza. So the question now is, how many cases are going to come out based on this one event? It's not like if it's going to happen, it's just how many.
So we don't know the exact answer to that. We have to wait and see what happens, but you're convinced that there will be some kind of bump. As we talk about all this, Pfizer has been beating the drum on recommending a third vaccine booster shot. The CDC hasn't gone that route yet. Do you think does the data show that a third shot might be necessary?
Well, what has happened is that in places that where the vaccine uptake is really good, like in Israel and in some parts of France, that the people that are getting really sick who've been vaccinated are people really at high risk. You know, they're elderly, they have underlying immunocompromised conditions, and they've done some small studies in those areas, and also here in the United States in organ transplant patients and a few other groups. And it looks like at least the antibody levels are improving if people get a booster, a third shot. Now, at some particular point, and this has been said from the beginning, that a third shot, a booster shot for everybody, is likely to come down the line. That day has not come yet. We're not seeing, once we start seeing people in the hospital again who've been fully vaccinated, then the booster's going out. It's a public health kind of nightmare. 161 million people have been vaccinated in the United States. To go tell 161 million people, oh, by the way, you need another shot. In addition to convincing the other 161 million people to get vaccinated themselves. The other 160 million people, we got to get them to take one shot, one or two shots, and then we're going to have all the ones already vaccinated. That's going to be a logistic challenge. And on that note, though, Dr. Murphy, so that's about half the country fully vaccinated. What rate of vaccination does the country need to be at to prevent outbreaks like we're seeing right now? Yeah. Well, we're talking about herd immunity. We don't even know what that number is. Herd immunity is difficult to calculate because you include all the people that are fully vaccinated. You also get to include some of the people who've had COVID. Remember at the beginning of this whole thing, if you had COVID, you didn't get COVID again, at least in the first couple months. Right. That turns out that kind of immunity wanes over a relatively short period of time. But they have some immunity. So you get to take those immune people and the vaccinated people, and you've got to get at least to 70. But unfortunately, with the Delta variant, it's probably going to be higher than 70%, probably 80, 85%. All right, Dr. Murphy, thank you so much for joining us, albeit under unfortunate circumstances in the country right now. Thank you. Yeah, it's unfortunate. An Olympic superstar withdraws from the Games in Tokyo. Gymnast Simone Biles stepped away from her team final yesterday following one rotation in next week's individual events. Biles is one of a growing number of professional athletes to recently bring attention to the mental stress associated with high-performance athletics. And joining us to dig deeper into this are Linda Ransdell, the new dean of Northern Illinois University's College of Health and Human Services. Ransdell has studied elite women athletes for years. And sports therapist Natalie Graves, whose practice specializes in the mental health of athletes from the Olympic and professional levels to college and youth levels. And we welcome both of you to Chicago tonight.
Thank you for having us.
First, Natalie Graves, your reaction to Biles's performance and then her subsequent withdrawal.
My first impression with the performance actually started at the trials when I noticed she was not performing as she normally does, and she didn't have for her standards, she didn't have a great performance. So that's when she became on my radar. And fast forward to the games, I think it just was a combination of what was already going on with her, but it was definitely the pressure and the expectations.
If they have too much stress, it's typically because they put pressure on themselves to be, exceptional at all times. There is the social media aspect of it. There's the fact that they're on the news 24/7, and there's this thing called fear of failure. And athletes are not used to it, and they don't deal with it well at any level. So I think, that probably what happened is, the level of stress and the competition and Maybe she wasn't feeling, like she normally does at that level of competition. So, I think it happens to athletes, unfortunately, on occasion.
And as we said, because of the nature of gymnastics, that could put her at great physical risk. Natalie Graves, given all these factors, is it typical for a team like USA Gymnastics to have a mental health professional on staff to help coach athletes through this?
Well, we would hope so. It's really imperative that we begin to have these mental health professionals already in place, already on staff to provide the support before something happens with the athletes. Because once something happens, oftentimes it's hard to reverse course. And we're seeing that struggle with Simone Biles right now.
And let's not forget, among all the factors here, USA Gymnastics, women's gymnastics, has been in the midst of a scandal, a firestorm with the former team physician Larry Nassar, and Simone Biles herself said she was sexually assaulted by him. How big a factor does that play into the mental state, at least of these women athletes right now?
Well, it's a big factor being a survivor of sexual abuse. Now, obviously, she has overcome a lot on the floor where she's excelled exceptionally, but that doesn't mean she's not impacted by it. So we really need to understand that, but also just as any one of us, we can have mental health struggles. 1 in 4 people in any given year will suffer from a mental illness. That could be depression, anxiety. So we have to stop treating this like this is some taboo, this strange thing that occurs. It's actually very, very common. And when you're a high-profile athlete, the pressure is that much more, and the expectations are so much higher. And so it's really hard when something comes in that may disrupt your training or your daily functioning. It makes it that much harder to get back on track when the whole world is watching.
And something
and
like
remember,
COVID.
She's only 24 years old.
Right. She's very young. Also young, Linda Ransdell, is the tennis superstar Naomi Osaka, who pulled out of the French Open and then Wimbledon, citing mental health concerns. I mean, it gets a predictable reaction. Some people criticize it, want to pile on. Others feel it's a positive thing. What impact does it have to have these high-pro athletes openly talking about this?
I think one of the things that happens in society is people think of these elite athletes as machines, and they're human beings, and they need to be treated as such. And human beings do experience failure. They do have to get back on their feet when things don't go the way that they want them to go. And I think that the admission of the mental health challenges that these athletes have, because they train so hard, so many hours a day, they're isolated in many cases, and particularly with COVID, it's a different set of circumstances that I don't think many of us can understand.
And Linda, you mentioned the factors earlier, social media, where people are not their best selves on social media, and they'll criticize and they'll try to score points by making fun or trolling. Are athletes under more pressure now, given just kind of the state of society, than they were maybe 10, 20 years ago?
I think so. I think that there are a lot of things that go on now that didn't go on pre-social media, pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter. And so we have to be mindful of that. And I also think that people will do and say things on social media that they might not do and say to a person's face. And that's unfortunate.
I think that's universally true. That's what we see on social media a lot. All right, interesting discussion, and our thanks to Linda Ransdell and Natalie Graves for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. More Chicago families will be eligible to have the lead service lines in their home replaced. This after the program launched by Mayor Lori Lightfoot nearly a year ago has been off to a slow start. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more details. Heather, remind us the mayor's plan back in September and why it has been slow to get off the ground.
Well, her plan had two parts. One would take federal money, about $15 million worth, and start replacing lead service lines for low and moderate income Chicagoans. Now, even though she announced that plan back in September, applications weren't opened until March, and only about 100 people applied for the program. So this week, she announced that instead of being a low or moderate income Chicagoan who had high levels of lead in their home's water, anybody could do it as long as you had kids and met those income requirements, hoping that more people would apply.
And more specifically, what are those income requirements, or what's the ballpark here to be eligible?
So it's about $75,000 for a family of four, so about 80% of the area's median income. And it's really to help those living in neighborhoods where these lead service lines can have the worst impact on Chicago's poorest children.
All right, how does the city plan on paying for this? Because it is going to be quite expensive.
So in all, the city estimates this would cost $8.5 billion to remove the 400,000 lead service lines in the city. The city can't afford it, but there may be money coming from the federal government as part of an infrastructure bill that started moving through the United States Senate today, Wednesday.
So that bill does have funding for a water service line replacement. And Heather, we are going to see you later in the program for Spotlight Politics to talk about just that and a lot of other things. And thank you very much, as always.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And up next, Chicago's colorful role in the early development of the comic strip. Stay with us. We have a lot more to get to on the program, including a look at why Illinois Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger is being ridiculed by members of his own party. But first, we recently featured a show at the Museum of Contemporary Art that put a spotlight on comics, from 1960s counterculture cartoons right up to present-day graphic novels. Well, that show has a sister exhibition which opened soon after at the Chicago Cultural Center. It looks at an even earlier history of comics, making the case that Chicago truly brought comics to life. Producer Mark Vitale has the story.
At the Cultural Center, the curators walk through their cartoonish creation. They are acclaimed artist Chris Ware and the city of Chicago's cultural historian Tim Samuelson.
This is an interest that we both shared, but Chris was able to put it into a form as an exhibit that I could have never put together something like this. And even where there's comics pages that I know really well and I've read since a kid, when I see them on the wall like this, it's like, oh, wow.
A comic strip really is kind of a visual two-dimensional rat maze. So I tried to create a three-dimensional analog to that and to use every available spot that I could, because in comics you're likely to see a dialogue balloon here, see a dialogue balloon here, an image behind. So I wanted to use the entire walls, not just have everything be a dry bathtub ring of imagery that gets dreary. Comics are a very active thing. I wanted it to be as fun and as exciting as a comic strip actually is.
We last met Chris Ware at his home studio in January 2020.
I grew up reading stupid superhero comics and reading them because I thought I would grow up to be a superhero. But when I became a professional cartoonist, what really appealed to me more than comic books, they always seemed to be somehow limited and sort of infantilized and very much based on a movie camera. I realized that the very earliest comics that were drawn before the advent of the movies was where the real action was and where the medium actually came to life and you could feel the soul and the warmth of the artist behind the pen.
The show covers from the late 19th century up through the 1950s, and it is full of revelations.
I was surprised more than anything to discover that the Chicago Tribune was actually a very experimental, strange newspaper.
The Chicago Tribune was not the first newspaper to have a Sunday comics page. However, it took the comics page and almost literally made it a work of art.
The exhibition abundantly credits the creators of the work. That includes Frank King, whose characters in his Gasoline Alley strip aged day by day and year by year. But the author of one short-lived Tribune comic strip from 1905 remains anonymous. Lucy and Sophie Say Goodbye features two women whose impassioned departures are always being interrupted.
It was published anonymously, not signed, which indicates something that was, that they were kind of pushing the envelope there. It didn't run for very long, but it's a beautiful strip and very powerful. The very first same-sex comic strip in the history of the medium.
Though some of the material is on loan, much of it comes from the curator's personal collections.
Some of these things are part of my own childhood obsession. It's kind of interesting to see little bits of your own existence and obsession, to see it on a gallery wall and other people looking at it.
Comics are looked down upon as sort of a throwaway medium, which I think is one of its greatest powers. It's a medium that you can look at and understand immediately without feeling like you have to know something about the history of art or the history of painting. If you look at a comic strip and you don't get it, you just assume the cartoonist is an idiot. It's a powerful medium, it's a beautiful medium, it's a emotional medium, and it's an unpretentious, personable medium, and that's what I hope to highlight with this show, is to have some sense of like what the rich textures of life and how it could be communicated in something that was essentially trash.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
Totally remember those Sunday comic sections in the Chicago Tribune. The show is called Chicago, Where Comics Came to Life. It is free and has just been extended at the Chicago Cultural Center through the end of the year. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, newly signed laws aimed at easing the marriage certification process for the LGBTQ plus community in Illinois.
This is a historic moment, and this is a democracy-defending moment.
Our Spotlight Politics team on the political fallout of the January 6th committee, especially on some Illinois congressmen. And untold stories about Frida Kahlo in a new exhibit featuring more than 20 of her original pieces. But for some more of today's top stories, the state reaches a bleak benchmark in COVID-19 cases just one day before Lollapalooza begins. The Illinois Department of Public Health reports more than 2,000 confirmed and probable cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. That is the highest number of daily cases reported here since early May. The state also reports another 6 deaths. That brings the total number of COVID cases in the state to more than 1.4 million since the beginning of the pandemic, and a total of 23,420 deaths. The state's 7-day positivity rate is now 4%, up from 1.9% the week before. And the Illinois Secretary of State, Jesse White, announces masks will be required for all employees and customers entering driver services facilities. Also at Secretary of State offices and the Illinois State Capitol building, that mask mandate will extend to. This reinstituted policy will begin August 2nd. A former federal prosecutor has been chosen to investigate the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and its handling of a decades-old murder case. A Cook County judge has appointed Lawrence Oliver to serve as special prosecutor in the case of Jackie Wilson. Wilson wrongfully spent decades behind bars for a double murder he has since been exonerated of. Wilson says he was repeatedly beaten and electroshocked by former Area 2 Commander John Burge and others working under him. He says they demanded a confession for the 1982 murders of 2 Chicago police officers. The U.S. Senate moves a step closer toward a deal on the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure proposal. A vote to open debate on the plan cleared the Senate by a 67-32 vote just this evening. The yea votes included Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who had previously been considered a hurdle to the legislation. Illinois Senator Dick Durbin called the vote a first step toward, quote, historic and long overdue investment in American infrastructure. And we'll have more on this with our Spotlight Politics team a bit later in the program. Illinois is set to begin awarding 185 coveted permits to operate recreational cannabis dispensary this year, about a year after a year of delays and frustration, that is. Tomorrow is the first of 3 lotteries, with 55 licenses being chosen among hundreds of applicants. Illinois was supposed to have awarded its first social equity dispensary licenses a year ago, but instead, lawsuits and criticisms of a flawed application scoring process put it on hold. The next 2 lotteries are scheduled for next month. LGBTQ groups are praising the signing of a package of new laws aimed at helping transgender and gender nonconforming residents. 2 of the laws aim to ease the process of changing one's name or title on official documents. Senate Bill 139 allows the removal of gendered language on marriage certificates, and House Bill 2590 allows for a person to get a new marriage certificate to reflect a legal name change. And joining us to hear more about these bills are State Senator Sarah Feigenholtz, whose district includes the north side of Chicago, and Shannon Parker, Director of Strategic Partnerships with Howard Brown Health. Welcome, both of you, back to Chicago tonight. Senator Feigenholtz, good to have you. Senator Feigenholtz, walk us through these two laws, if you would.
Okay, happy to do that. Two bills. First of all, parents, you should know that Illinois, who usually brings up the back of the train, is the second state in the country to have done both Senate Bill 139 and House Bill 2590. Senate Bill 139 is about being able to change your gender markers on your marriage certificate, even retroactively. And well, actually, to change it from husband and wife to non-binary or whatever a person chooses. The second bill allows you to retroactively change your gender on your marriage certificate.
And Shannon Parker, how significant are these changes in Illinois law to the trans community and to the community at large?
Oh my goodness, how aren't they? You know, as the senator was saying, when you think about these bills that were passed, really what they do is they remove more burdens, right? They remove more injustices and barriers that trans folks in particular face on a day-to-day basis. When we think about the LGBTQ family, right? Of all of the identities, it's the T in that acronym, right? It's transgender people who really do shoulder that burden. When we think about the highest rates of family rejection, suicide, murder in our LGBTQ community, again, it's transgender people who really do suffer. So when thinking about what the senator was just saying, these bills passing into laws actually do help to alleviate more of those burdens that we as a community face on a daily basis. And I'll tell you something, just in 2021 alone, 31 trans people and non-conforming folks were fatally shot or they were actually killed by other violent means. And the thing is that we say at least, because again, a lot of those stories go unreported or they go misreported. And to add to that, the majority of those folks were Black and Latinx transgender women.
So, Senator Feigenholtz, when you hear all that, on a specific level, what was it like for trans folks to deal with marriage certificates in Illinois? You know, if they didn't want to be called Mr. or Mrs. and have proper titles on there.
You know, Paris, people come to their legislators with real life, everyday challenges. And our office talked to a lot of people, you know, who had some really horrible experiences. One spouse being denied hospital visitation, another denied their employer's health insurance coverage because all of their records were not aligned as far as gender. And depending on where in this state they live and these hospitalizations or visitations are necessary, this puts a lot of people in danger. As Shannon talked about, you know, the transgender community is disproportionately victimized. And, you know, as a legislator, I feel that every barrier we can eliminate reduces that stigma, reduces that stress, and gives us an opportunity to move this issue forward for all of our transgender siblings.
So this becomes an issue of life and death. Shannon Parker, it's not just marriage certificates, but the LGBTQ community is trying to get these kinds of changes for all manner of documents, like driver's licenses. So how important is that to be able to to have the same thing? And what kinds of documents would you like to see updated?
Absolutely. So when we talk about the importance of those modernization acts, right, making sure that systems talk to each other and making sure that trans folks have access to those everyday documents that allow you access to federal buildings, that allow you access to a job, right? We're talking about IDs. We're talking about birth certificates. We're talking about those everyday things that our non-transgender counterparts don't even think about, right? Because again, those are basic rights. Those are basic things that everyone has access to. So again, as the senator just said, which was so great, talking about removing barriers for trans folks in order to live fuller, richer, more robust lives. And that's what all of this is about.
Shannon, you mentioned the violence. I'm sorry, you mentioned the violence targeting the trans community. I mean, this comes as there have been a lot of legislation in the past year in other states rolling back rights for the transgender community, dealing with athletics and other things. I mean, it just feels like this community has been targeted in a number of states. How has that impacted your community?
It's been hard, you know, and I will say that being an Illinoisan, we are very fortunate to live on this magical little island, if you will. Not perfect, but my goodness, when we think about some of our more southern states, when we think about some of our states who are ran by, you know, other parties even, we see a lot of challenges, right? We see those daily fleecing of rights from hospital access to sports to bathroom bills. So many things are happening on a day-to-day basis that are absolutely demoralizing to our community. So again, with champions like Senator Feigenholtz and other folks who were such strong supporters of those bills, we are moving in the right direction.
Senator Feigenholtz, before we leave, I want to get to another bill that the governor signed yesterday, which does away with a long-held statute in Illinois that criminalized the transmission of HIV. First of all, tell us what that statute was and why it was important to get rid of it.
Well, I mean, I think that historically there was a lot of stigma around HIV and AIDS. Now we're in a much different space where people are much more understanding, welcoming, and we have, I believe it was Senator Peters who said, "PrEP, not prison,"
yes,
which I thought was a very interesting little soundbite. And it's true. We've come a long way in this state, Paris. Illinois is a beacon. As Shannon said, other states are dialing it backwards, but not Illinois. We're dialing it forward on equity, on justice, and believe me, I like this. It's, you know, I was in the General Assembly for many years when it was very difficult to get a bill like these two bills passed, and I couldn't be happier. I'm not sure we would have even been able to do the repeal of the HIV criminalization bill, but we're in a new place, and we've actually got bipartisan support on some of these bills. So things seem to be calming down. Cooler heads are prevailing, and we're doing the right thing for everyone in Illinois, including our trans siblings.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Our thanks to State Senator Sarah Feigenholtz and Shannon Parker. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
And up next, our Spotlight Politics team on Illinois Republicans' reaction to the January 6th hearing and much more. So please stay with us.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/daily briefing and sign up.
The January 6th Select Committee hearing divides two Illinois Republican congressmen, plus a long-awaited bipartisan agreement on infrastructure seems to be closer. That and much more in our Spotlight Politics. And joining us tonight are familiar faces, Heather Sharon and Amanda Vinicky. Let's start off with that hearing yesterday. We heard a lot of emotional testimony, including some remarks and questions from Illinois Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Let's take a listen.
You talk about the impact of that day. But you guys won. You guys held. You know, democracies are not defined by our bad days. We're defined by how we come back from bad days.
We've talked to Kinzinger a lot since this. And we talked to him on the 6th that night, and he was clearly shaken and clearly emotional about what happened that day. So he found himself on this committee, Amanda Vinicky. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi appointed him on Sunday. Remind us how he got on the committee, because he wasn't on it at first.
Well, yeah, this is why he's got the moniker from Republican leader McCarthy that he's a Pelosi member now, because he was appointed by the Democratic speaker versus by the GOP leader. And that's unheard of. Also unheard of, Pelosi refusing to sit members of a minority party on a select committee. Much of this is unprecedented, the continuation of so much unprecedented under President Donald Trump's term. And I think really this is a carryover of that, of course, and a carryover of the friction that you have in the Republican Party, a very deep soul searching for, I think, some members, including Kinzinger. So that's how he got on the committee. And by the way, after another Illinois Republican, Rodney Davis, who had been chosen by the Republican leader to be a member, instead didn't take his seat because Pelosi, as I had noted, rejected some others. So this is, I think, shows, yes, this is partisan. Of course it is. And it is nonetheless also a very significant emotional issue. I think I don't know how you can watch videos of what happened on January 6th and not see that.
Absolutely, and more videos come out in some of these federal cases. As testimony was happening inside the Capitol, Heather, members of the GOP were outside blaming Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democrats for security issues. Take a look at what Congressman Rodney Davis, who, as Amanda said, was initially selected by McCarthy to be on that committee, but then pulled, said about blocking fixes to Capitol security.
They can't get the security posture where they think it is up to par before they have to go to political appointees. We tried to fix this over the last few years, and the Democrats have stopped us every single step of the way.
Heather, what's he talking about here, this sort of argument about security at the Capitol and kind of being stonewalled?
Well, they're trying to change the subject from what happened on January 6th to a question about who was responsible for security at the Capitol, and they're trying to lay that on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. However, that does not really address the fact that it was a mob of pro-Trump protesters that stormed the Capitol, and there's no doubt that there are questions about how the Capitol was protected and whether the Capitol Police had the proper gear and backup. However, that is really not what is at issue with this committee, and is really an attempt to change the subject from the fact that these people stormed the Capitol chanting to hang former Vice President Mike Pence and trying to look for Nancy Pelosi. It remains to be seen whether that argument will gain any traction.
And it also,
Here I have, sorry, Paris, just briefly here, also in those same remarks, Congressman Davis said, you know, it's unfortunate that I can't be there asking questions, which is another point that does not particularly ring true because, again, repeating, of course, he could have been. He was appointed and essentially chose not to take that step. And that is interesting because his name is one that is mentioned, depending on how the congressional map is drawn, as a potential candidate for governor against Democrat presumed nominee J.B. Pritzker. And further, you have Kinzinger's political future up for grabs. He's facing a pro-Trump Republican candidate, again, based depending on how these districts are drawn. And he made a point during the hearing, besides just that emotion that you saw, to say, I am a conservative Republican.
And let's also say that some of the political arguments are disingenuous because the House initially took up a vote to have a bipartisan committee, like the 9/11 Commission, investigate this, and it was defeated largely because it was opposed by all but about 35 Republicans. Let's hear some of the testimony from the police officers yesterday.
I feel myself losing oxygen and recall thinking to myself, this is how I'm going to die.
No one had ever called me a while wearing the uniform of a Capitol Police officer.
The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful.
A lot of anger there, and you do still see some mocking in certain conservative media circles, some of the television personalities saying that the performances are worthy of an Academy Award. Heather, what are the possible consequences of testifying before Congress, and do you think this, how does this play, I guess, among mainstream America?
Well, it's really startling to see these police officers who were physically assaulted and really traumatized during the riot on January 6th be held up for ridicule for having an emotional reaction to those incidents. And we heard from Officer Michael Fanone, who then shared a voicemail that he got, which was filled with slurs and other attacks. And it has to make people think twice before they testify before Congress to know that this is what they're signing up for. All three of those officers said they were aware that they would be mocked, that they would be ridiculed, but that they did so anyway because they felt that it was important that they continue to uphold their oaths as police officers and to the Constitution.
All right, let's move on to...
You don't see often, you don't often see in congressional panels those giving testimony,
that kind of emotion,
pointing their fingers at members of Congress, as you did with those officers.
Right.
They cast shame on the GOP.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to news that's still developing in Washington, D.C., a bipartisan agreement on infrastructure. Let's hear what President Biden says about this.
Looks like we reached a bipartisan agreement on infrastructure, fancy word for bridges, roads.
And bipartisan, we mean Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell says just a few hours ago, and in fact, I think he voted the way he tweeted he was going to vote. He has a yes vote in moving forward on this legislation. Heather, how did that come to be?
Well, there was an agreement that America's infrastructure is literally crumbling, and there are billions, tens of billions of dollars in this bill earmarked for roads and bridges and other necessary things. Illinois especially stands to get a lot of money to replace lead service lines that you heard me talk a little bit about before. Chicago has more lead service lines than anywhere else in the nation, so you better believe Mayor Lightfoot and Governor J.B. Pritzker are keeping a close eye on this bill's passage, because there's no way that the city or the state could afford to foot the bill to replace these lead service lines, which are really imperiling the safety of the city and the state's drinking water.
And, you know, this is going to be a tenuous coalition here because you're going to have senators and Congress people that believe it's too much spending and then others that believe it's not nearly enough. So, Amanda, what do you think the final package is going to look like once it gets through that legislative meat grinder?
Once, if, when.
Right.
I mean, certainly this vote was a major step given the lack of bipartisanship that has been a hallmark of Washington for so long. So it's significant. It is, however, but one step, and also but one chamber. From what I gather, it is a deal, but it's not a deal that is written on paper yet. So you could see further fights arise. And then, of course, you got to have the House agree, and the dynamics are much different. So not a done deal yet.
All right, let's move to some local news. Heather, there's been a lot of controversy around a proposed Chicago gang database, or a database that has supposedly sort of been out there, although the police dispute whether it's really a gang database. So there was some debate about it today in council. Talk about that.
Yes, so more than 2 years ago, the city's Inspector General, Joseph Ferguson, said this database was full of flawed records that disproportionately targeted Black and Latino Chicagoans, and he called on the police department to immediately craft a new database that protected people's rights and was useful for the police. 2 years later, the police department acknowledges they're still using that flawed data, and they say they don't have any choice because they have to use it to stop retaliatory gang violence. However, the new database won't be online until September at the earliest, but it's not clear how people will be listed in the database, precisely how they will get out of the database if it's a mistake, and exactly how much it will cost the city. So we have a lot of questions remaining about this very serious issue, which we know has a disproportionate impact on the Latino community because it used to be accessible by federal immigration agents, and there were suggestions that people were deported because of their inclusion in it.
And there's been a lot of questions over the year, Amanda, on the process for awarding permits to open up a marijuana dispensary. Has the state finally figured these kinks out?
That's another one that we will see. I mean, nothing has gone as planned in this process. And so we might learn soon enough, because there will be a series of 3 lotteries to begin to pull out actually an increased number of licenses. What was going to be 75 is now 185. And to 3 separate groups, essentially, a whole lot more of these applicants will have an opportunity to get one of these licenses to sell marijuana in the state of Illinois. And that is huge. You're selling green, but you're basically pocketing a different type of green, as in cash. If you get one of these, is the thought. But we will have the first lottery tomorrow, and I think there are still a whole lot of misgivings as to whether it will meet the intent of bringing more people that are from communities or who have been directly impacted by the war on drugs, particularly people of color and entrepreneurs of color wanting to get into the cannabis industry, whether that is a goal that is going to be met or whether these applicants still have a lot of deep-pocketed individuals with clout.
I know a lot of applicants believe it's high time that they're awarded some of these permits. I'm sorry. All right, we're gonna end on that note. Fortunately, thanks to Heather and Amanda as always. And up next, a tour of a new exhibit featuring more than 20 of Frida Kahlo's original pieces. But first, a look at the weather. For the first time since the late 70s, a portion of artist Frida Kahlo's original works are here in Chicago as part of a new exhibition. Arts correspondent Angel Ito recently took us for a visit and gave us a closer look at how Frida Kahlo's life influenced her work. Here's another look.
While she's known as one of the most influential Mexican painters of our time, a new exhibit honoring the late artist hopes to tell stories not commonly shared of Frida Kahlo.
The idea behind this was to give people context to her life, who she was, her influence, and not only about her, but what was going on in that period.
The first portion of the exhibit tells just that, a breakdown of who Kahlo was before she became an artist, leading up to a moment that would arguably define her work forever. A severe bus accident would require her to have more than 30 surgeries and force her to wear corsets for the rest of her life. But it was in her recovery period that she found ingenuity within her developing craft. This is a recreation of the bed that Frida Kahlo painted some of her earliest self-portraits in, all with the help of a mirror.
Think about this young 18-year-old girl that's confined, that's vibrant and depressed. They created an easel that she could use while lying in bed. And they put a mirror underneath the canopy so that she could see herself. And so she started painting self-portraits. And she said, I often paint self-portraits because I am so often alone. And I am the subject I know best.
Now, once visitors have gotten to know the woman behind the artist, they're encouraged to use that knowledge to better interpret 26 of Kahlo's original works, borrowed from the Dolores Almedo collection.
Everyone can recognize the eyebrows, the clothes, the hair pulled up, but those are very superficial kind of exterior representations of who she was. I think the opportunity to see these actual works in person is an opportunity to get as close to hearing Frida tell her own story. She speaks very directly and honestly about the challenges in her life. That has an honesty and an intensity that's coupled with the intensity of the images themselves, so it's almost like they're supercharged.
But the figures in her work are so recognizable, many argue that Kahlo's style was based in surrealism, an idea she rejected. But it's because of the stories within her stories that curator Justin Whitty describes her style as symbolic realism, most notably seen in her broken column self-portrait.
You have Frida exposed, the center of her chest kind of opened up, and you see in replaced of a spine, a column that's been shattered and cracked and is barely holding on. And then she herself and that column are kind of held together by this medical corset. And then on top of that crumbling, fragile column, you have Kahlo's head staring out at the viewer. And although she has tears coming out of her face expressive of the pain that she's in, her look is in no way resigned to the pain. And it's unapologetic. She did not run away from these realities in her life. She did not try to diminish herself because of them. And she was an incredibly strong, powerful woman and artist who spoke truthfully through her work, even when that truth was painful.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
And you can check out the exhibit Frida Kahlo, Timeless, until September 6th at the Cleve Carney Museum of Art, located in the Mackinac Art Center in Glen Ellen. And that is our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast in the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Music, must, or super spreader event. Lollapalooza is set to begin despite rising COVID cases. We take you inside one of Chicago's biggest festivals. Plus, Jeffrey Bayer on the status of a beloved and endangered Czech restaurant in Cicero. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.